The Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.thebenjamindixonshow.com to register for our blog and join the Progressive Army.
Today is Tuesday, January 3rd, 2023. Thank you so much for joining me. I apologize for the lateness of today's episode, but it's only because the Republican Party has yet to decide who the next Speaker of the House is. I wanted to report on that specifically, but they have gone to two votes, which is historic in and of itself. It's been 100 years since the House of Representatives had to go to a second vote in order to select a Speaker of the House. And now they've gone to a second vote. And even in the second vote, Kevin McCarthy has failed to get the votes necessary to serve as Speaker of the House. In fact, Hakeem Jeffries of New York, the Democrat, he was the leader in both of those votes. Republicans, as a handful of Republicans, made it clear from the beginning that they would never support Kevin McCarthy. And that decision has led to utter chaos, not only on the floor in the House of Representatives, but throughout the entirety of the Republican Party. Take a listen into this first clip from Kevin McCarthy as he laments what's going on.
Long time. I've been leader for 4 years. I came into this position and we had less than 200 members. We are now sitting in the majority. We put forth to the American public a commitment to America. There's times we're going to have to argue with our own members if they're looking at for only positions for themselves, not for the country. For the last 2 months, we worked together as a whole conference to develop rules that empower all members. But we're not empowering certain members over others. Last night I was presented the only way to have 218 votes if I provided certain members with certain positions, certain gavels, to take over the church committee, to have certain budgets. And they even came to the position where one, Matt Gaetz, said, I don't care if we go to plurality and we elect Hakeem Jeffries and it hurts the new frontline members not to get reelected. Well, that's not about America, and I will always fight to put the American people first, not a few individuals that want something for themselves. So we may have a battle on the floor, but the battle is for the conference and the country, and that's fine with me.
It's rather hilarious to hear Kevin McCarthy regularly try to speak as though he is an inspirational figure who's trying to do the right thing for America and trying to do the right thing for humanity, when in reality he's nothing more than a far-right extremist himself. As we discussed on yesterday's episode, the Republican Party has gone from conservative to reactionary to fascist. And there's no satisfying the very people that Kevin McCarthy has empowered all along. It's a saying that my father told me many years ago. You can feed an alligator as much as you want, as many enemies as you want. In the end, the alligator will consume you. And this is what's happening in real time. He mentioned Matt Gaetz. Listen to Matt Gaetz as he describes his side of the story. And forgive me, normally I don't really care so much about the horse race, not as much as some of these other issues that we're going through. But you have to excuse me while I enjoy the schadenfreude of extremists who will do their best to cause harm to every single group except for rich, white, conservative men. That's literally what they have in common. From Marjorie Taylor Greene to Lauren Boebert to Matt Gaetz to Kevin McCarthy, they are all there to do the bidding of the rich, to protect white supremacy, and to forward conservatism. So you have to forgive me as I enjoy the schadenfreude. Here is Matt Gaetz as to where he stands on the matter.
We were threatened by my committee chairman to be on the Armed Services Committee, Mr. Rogers, that if we did not vote for Mr. McCarthy, we would be removed from committees. Our position is that if Kevin McCarthy is the Speaker of the House and we don't have an ability to ensure that there is oomph behind the agenda and energy behind our oversight, that the committee assignments don't mean that much anyway. I'm not here to participate in some puppet show where we pass a bunch of messaging bills, send them to the Senate, watch them die, fail to use leverage, and don't hold the Biden administration accountable. I don't want to relive the Benghazi experience where it's just theater pretending to be oversight, right? We can do better than that, and that's our purpose today.
Well, at least he's admitting that the Benghazi hearings were nothing more than theater, and I'm not sure if his argument actually has any credibility here, any substance here, because all the Republican Party does is theater. That's it. That's what they specialize in. They are committed. Kevin McCarthy is as committed to giving America 2 years of nothing but political theater. So I'm not quite sure exactly why Matt Gaetz is so against Kevin McCarthy, but he's so committed in his opposition to Kevin McCarthy that after Jim Jordan, the congressman from Ohio, who actually, just a reminder, Jim Jordan is a congressman that was involved in the scandal at Ohio State, not reporting the sexual assault there. And in fact, discouraging, according to some reports, he allegedly discouraged students from speaking out about the sexual assault that they suffered. Well, that very same Jim Jordan got up to nominate Kevin McCarthy. But immediately after he nominated Kevin McCarthy, Jim Jordan nominated Kevin McCarthy, Matt Gaetz stood up to nominate Jim Jordan. And Jim Jordan got 19 votes on the second ballot. Here is Jim Jordan giving the nomination for Kevin McCarthy on the second round of the Speaker of the House vote.
I rise to nominate Kevin McCarthy for Speaker of the House. I came in with Kevin. We came in the same time 16 years ago. We haven't always agreed on everything, but I like his fight. I like his tenacity. And I liked it. I remember Kevin told me, he said, when the toughest times in life are when you get knocked down. The question is, can you come back? I've always seen him be able to do that.
I don't think Kevin McCarthy is going to come back after that second ballot. Well, it remains to be seen as of this recording. But as of the second ballot, he still fell short of Hakeem Jeffries. And immediately after Jim Jordan made that speech, Matt Gaetz rose to nominate Jim Jordan for Speaker of the House.
Well, sometimes we have to do jobs that we don't really want to do. And sometimes we have to do jobs that we are called to do. And so, my colleagues, I rise to nominate the most talented, hardest working member of the Republican Conference, who just gave a speech with more vision than we have ever heard from the alternative. I'm nominating Jim Jordan. Jim Jordan is humble, perhaps today, humble to a fault. Maybe the right person for the job of Speaker of the House isn't someone who wants it so bad.
And you could hear the murmuring taking place on the House floor as some of them tried to clap in support of the nomination of Jim Jordan. But most of the people on the floor, most of the Republicans on the floor, were taken aback because they couldn't believe that Matt Gaetz and the approximately 19 Republicans who stand with them, most of whom are a part of the Freedom Caucus, including Lauren Boebert and Andy Biggs, as we spoke of yesterday, they are absolutely willing to scorch the earth with the House of Representatives altogether, with the Speaker of the House specifically, in order to. And here's the thing, I was going to say in order to get what they want, but Kevin McCarthy already offered them exactly what they asked for, with some exceptions, right? You heard in the first clip that he said there's certain places he wasn't willing to go. Their requests became very personal. They wanted to not forward policy, according to Kevin McCarthy. They wanted personal power and gain. But he did capitulate on one of the critical issues, the ability to call a vote of no confidence, for any 5 members to call for a vote of no confidence. Well, that wasn't enough for Lauren Boebert. She wanted a single member of the Republican caucus to be able to call to vacate the speaker's seat. Listen in.
So I've said from the beginning that my hard line was the motion to vacate. Single member motion to vacate. You cannot demand more responsibility and less accountability. And Kevin McCarthy was taking the path of Nancy Pelosi and following her precedents with the motion to vacate. We were just told when we left this door, we will give you single member motion to vacate. Just today. That was the starting point for negotiations. That was the starting point to everything that we are wanting to transform the way Washington, D.C. operates.
So let me correct myself. So they weren't satisfied. And Kevin McCarthy wasn't willing to capitulate it, but it sounds like they were playing some games behind the doors, behind closed doors, posturing and positioning, trying to get everything they could on one hand from the Freedom Caucus and Matt Gaetz and Lauren Boebert, and on the other hand, Kevin McCarthy trying to make promises that he clearly did not intend to keep. And to be quite honest with you, when you have extremists and again, I want to be careful with this language, because to me, Kevin McCarthy is an extremist, not just to me, but in terms of American politics and the shift towards the right, towards a reactionary nation. This guy is as extreme as every other Republican. But you have these others. You have people like Matt Gaetz and Lauren Boebert who've gotten a little taste of power, and they are doing everything they can to run the show, to the dismay of one Marjorie Taylor Greene, who decided to go in and be in league with Kevin McCarthy. Here she is going after her former bestie, Lauren Boebert, and Matt Gaetz, because she's frustrated that her pick for a Speaker of the House doesn't look like he's going to win.
I'm furious. Well, let me tell you something. While the conservatives that the base supports and believes in, let me remind everyone, they're not perfect either. Let me remind everyone this. Matt Gaetz, who has compared Kevin McCarthy to Paul Ryan, my friend Matt Gaetz, he supported Paul Ryan almost more than anyone. It's still on his social media. As a matter of fact, his first vote in Congress was for Paul Ryan as Speaker. And then he cheered him on for nearly a year and a half or more when people like me were at home furious at Paul Ryan's speakership because it wasn't passing the MAGA agenda that we all supported. Chip Roy, he refused to object on January 6th. That's not what our base wanted. He also set out the vote for the January 6th committee. Lauren Boebert, under $2 million from Kevin McCarthy to get elected. Many more people have taken Kevin McCarthy's money to get elected, and then there's a few of them that don't want to support him as Speaker. So imagine that. This is not anything about the country. This is all about never Kevin. They just don't like Kevin McCarthy. And you cannot be successful in anything if you aren't able to walk in a room, make what you want, and get a deal done, and then walk away with the W and get to work and not worry about who you like and who you don't like. This is not about prom king. This is not about a pastor. This is about electing a person to sit in the speaker chair so that we can all get to work.
She is really upset. And it seems as though her pick, Kevin McCarthy, is not going to become Speaker of the House. Now, I haven't checked since the beginning of this recording, so I'm not sure exactly where they are, where it stands this exact moment. And in fact, if they hold another vote before the end of the night, it's very possible that they will go ahead and elect someone. There's a possibility if Kevin McCarthy doesn't hold the line and just go through this process where he's going to continuously lose throughout the night until, well, those 19 or at least a portion of them capitulate. There's a lot of scenarios here where the Democrats can rally behind some other Republican and help them get nominated as Speaker of the House. And it's possible if Kevin McCarthy gives in that someone like Jim Jordan would become the Speaker of the House. Any way you cut it, this has been an utter crap show. I'm doing my best here to cut out all the profanity, but it's a mess. It's a mess because we have been inundated with extremists. And that's what we're dealing with here. We're dealing with the furthest extreme in the Republican Party going after and attacking the very next closest extremist that they have there. Another name that someone dropped was Steve Scalise, the possibility that he could slide in there and pick up the nomination and get enough votes to win. And so we're dealing with either extremist number 1, extremist number 2, or extreme racist number 3. These are the options. Fox News picked up on this and they're providing coverage. I just want to share just a little bit more schadenfreude before we move on. Take a listen to Brian Kilmeade as he is furious on Fox and Friends.
Can anyone, you should not take this job if it's about your ego and your personal agenda. Right. The whole thing should be service for the country, and the subset is your party. Please explain to me how this helps your party. You're looking like idiots in front of the country.
Exactly. Republicans need to unite.
Well, when you specialize in divisiveness, bigotry, and extremism, don't be surprised when it comes back to bite you in the behind.
Go to www.patreon.com/The BPD Show and get twice the content and unfiltered interviews without any of the commercial interruptions.
And here we go. A very special welcome to our two newest patrons. Shout out to Kimberly Frazier B. Thank you so much for becoming a patron. And very special welcome to Vince. Vince, thank you so much for becoming a patron. Patreon.com/The BPD Show. Oh, wait a minute. You too can become a part of this prestigious and prodigious patron family by going to patreon.com/The BPD Show, where you'll get twice the content, none of the commercial interruptions, and you get access to our patron parties coming up soon as DJ Exclusive is back in full action. We've been sending our thoughts to our brother and our prayers to our brother who's been down, but patreon.com, and welcome to our two newest patrons. We'll be back right after this break.
Welcome back to the Benjamin Dixon Show. Visit us online at thebenjamindixonshow.com.
Welcome back. Welcome back. During the break, I had a moment to check, and Kevin McCarthy has lost on a third ballot. Talk about making history. Kevin McCarthy has lost now 3 times. And so where they go from here, I'm not quite sure in terms of this evening, but I imagine they're going to keep voting until they have a Speaker of the House, because nothing can proceed. Nothing can move forward. None of the new members can be seated or sworn in without a Speaker of the House. So right now there's chaos. But I want to move to an interview that I had the pleasure of doing, and this is part 1 of the interview, with Professor Harvey Kaye, who is a historian and sociologist and author of several books, including 3 that I want to specifically mention that are relevant to this conversation. He's the author of The Fight for 4 Freedoms, What Made FDR and the Greatest Generation Truly Great. He's also the author of Take Hold of Our History, Make America Radical Again. And he's the author of FDR on Democracy. Both, or rather all 3 of those books are pertinent to this specific conversation that we began today on fascism and the creeping authoritarianism that it's not only a belief that I have, it is genuinely happening. We are moving quickly towards an authoritarian state, a complete and totalitarian state under the control of fascists, particularly theocratic fascists. Now, I'll have the theocratic conversation in the next series of interviews that I will be having with several theologians. But I want to focus on, in this conversation, the historical perspective. And Professor Kaye outlined brilliantly the connections between the reactionary right that we're dealing with today and the pushback against all of the historical wins that progressives made in the 20th century. Listen to part 1 of Professor Kaye explaining exactly how we got where we are right now.
To make full sense of it, to really appreciate what has gone on now for 50 years, we actually have to go back all the way to the stretch of years from the 1930s to the 1960s. And the tendency is, of course, given the fact that I'm older than probably most of our listeners, the tendency on the part of most people is to see those things very discreetly. To whatever extent they know about the 30s, that's way in the past. The 60s, which was when I was a teenager and a college student, entered college, there again, it becomes something, well, that's in the past. And yet there's no way we will understand these past 50 years if we don't see the 30s to the 30s and the 60s. In fact, I would go so far as to say the 30s through the 60s and what was achieved in the course of those years. I mean, we really ought to remember that in some ways, the period 30s to the 60s was a truly extraordinary period in American history. Okay, because what you have almost not bookends, because I hate to think of them as bookends, but in terms of what transpired is in the 1930s, the New Deal years of Franklin Roosevelt, for all of the faults and failings, for all the things they left behind, it really was a period of revolutionary, or at the least radical changes. I mean, for the first time ever, the American people, especially working people, literally pushed and empowered the federal government to address the needs of working people and the poor. That was not the case historically in the United States. To whatever extent poverty became a serious problem for people, it was generally handled at the local level or by churches and other groups. But in the 30s, given the scale of the Great Depression, American working people, actually mobilized truly by FDR and the labor movement, pushed for and secured a massive set of changes. So, for example, they actually subjected big business, what we would today call corporate capital, to government democratic regulation, supervision and regulation, that is. They, as I said before, empowered the federal government, pushed the federal government to truly begin to address the needs of working people and the poor. But that outraged big business and conservatives and reactionaries. You can imagine the corporate bosses having to deal with labor unions, knowing the federal government would take the side of the unions. Imagine conservatives who under no circumstances would ever have approved Social Security. They got that through. And then don't forget, Southern white supremacists who were running the Southern states, they were absolutely convinced that FDR was going to enact serious integration laws. Now, though that did not happen, it is the case that vast numbers of African Americans did get jobs in many of these public works projects, and they had incredible hopes and aspirations that were inspired by those kinds of changes.
Professor Kaye identified 3 groups that had a reaction, a response to the progress that was made during the 20th century in the New Deal and all of the progressive movements that happened during that period, all the way forward to Lyndon B. Johnson. Keep those 3 groups in mind. They're critical because they are the same 3 groups that we're dealing with today. The corporate interest, conservative ideologues who are willing to do the bidding of corporate interests, and white supremacists, reactionaries, who, above all else, did not want to see the progress of not only African Americans in the South, but any group that was not a part of their white conservative male coalition. Those are the same groups that we are dealing with today. Sans 1, the religious zealots. I'll be speaking about the religious aspect of this ongoing coup that's happening in a few weeks with Professor Anthea Butler. She will bring that to light. But those first 3 groups that Professor Kaye identifies, they're critical in understanding the coalition that we are fighting against right now. They have been fighting back. They have been responding to the progress that we have made as a nation since FDR. More from Professor Kaye.
During World War II, the changes continued because, for example, the labor movement expanded dramatically during World War II with the growth of the war industries. And by the way, African Americans became directly involved. And because of, I think it was called the War Production Board or one of those, they actually raised the minimum wage, which had already been approved in the 30s by the Democrats. They raised the minimum wage in such a way that for the first time ever, there was a serious decrease in inequality, and African-American families secured higher wages as a consequence. FDR, however, died in 45, and in the transition to peace and the confusion involved using that, Republicans emerged all the more aggressively, backed by big capital. And the late 40s saw the beginnings, well, we call it the beginnings of the McCarthy period and the suppression of the left, but it was a suppression of labor. It was an assault on the civil rights movement. I mean, all across the board, there was that kind of reaction. But the 50s, as much as the struggles would have to go on, the 50s really were a period of dynamic changes. The labor movement grew such that 1 of every 3 workers was in a labor union. The civil rights movement began its march on segregation. And the Supreme Court, of course, passed Brown v. Board of Education, which, although it was not instituted immediately, literally changed the legal landscape on the question of segregation in the South, apartheid in the South. Those young men and women of all backgrounds, all races, and ethnicities who had come through the Great Depression, saw what was possible if you harness the powers of government, of democratic government, and then saw what was literally an incredible war effort against fascism in Europe and Japanese militarism in East Asia. Those young folks who might have been 15 in 1935, 25 in 1945, 35 in 1955, in the 1960s, they were literally the folks who put into office one of the most liberal, indeed progressive, administrations and Congresses that the United States had ever seen. For all of it, again, for all of the faults and failings and for all of the tragedy that would ensue in the war in Vietnam, Lyndon Johnson was, in essence, a kind of nephew to FDR. And the Great Society programs and War on Poverty programs were included, don't forget, Civil Rights Act, Voting Rights Act, pushed by the Civil Rights Movement, lobbied for by the labor movement, immigration reform, environmental protections, Medicare and Medicaid, the vast expansion of education. I mean, this became, in essence, a smaller but significant addition, you might say, or addition to the New Deal experience. So here's this generation from the 30s to the 60s that was truly, and I say this without reservation, radically transforming the America of the 19th and early 20th century. Big business and conservatives, and let's be blunt about it, reactionaries, those white supremacists, we're talking mostly in the South, however much they were pushed back, however much their power was reduced, they were not defeated. And coming into the 70s, here's what happens. The struggles of the 60s, the movements of African Americans, of labor unionists, of, especially in the 60s, of public employee unionism, which became all the more a question of black and white unionism, the women's movement. I mean, all of these things scared the crap out of conservatives, reactionaries, and the corporate bosses.
This is part one of an ongoing conversation that I will be having with many professors and scholars. I have much more from Professor Harvey Kaye. I'll be playing more of this during the patrons portion as well as on tomorrow's episode. But I really want you to pick up on something that he said. The progress of the 20th century that we are right now trying to survive the backlash because of. Most of what we're dealing with right now today is a result of the reaction that these three groups, reactionaries, conservatives, and business interests, which today are all synonymous, one and the same. But we are as a nation trying to survive a move towards authoritarianism because those groups, as he said, they were weakened, but they were not defeated. They were terrified, and they placed in motion a concerted effort to undo every single move, every single bill, every single act that gave us the progress of the 20th century. We're dealing with the response to that. And it's important for us to understand the historical perspective, which is why I'm so grateful for Professor Kaye. He gave me an abundance of information and knowledge, and we'll be sharing it along the way. But it's important for us to understand that this is a long game. This is not a new thing from Republicans or from conservatives. This has been the trajectory of our nation ever since this nation dared to do a single thing for someone who was not already a rich white aristocrat. That's what we're dealing with. And if we don't understand it from a long arc perspective, then we really won't understand exactly how committed they are, how strategic they really are. I spend a lot of time mocking them on my show, but I want to make sure that we understand that this is a long-term strategy that they have been committed to for over half a century. They passed this strategy down from generation to generation, and what we're dealing with today is the acceleration of this strategy by new extremists. extremists who are willing to literally destroy this country in order to protect their own personal, economic, and political and ideological interests. That's the only difference. Patrons, stay tuned. Everyone else, we'll see you tomorrow.